Hi guys, my name is Emily. Welcome to my channel. I like to do videos on topics that I think are important. So the topic of this video, as you can see from the title, is about the Radium Girls. So to begin this story, I just want to give a little bit of background. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie actually discovered the element radium. And it was discovered to be a radioactive element. And then much later, many years later, Marie Curie actually died from leukemia, because of her work with radium. As I said, radium is a radioactive element. It glows in the dark. And today, radium is very important to the medical community. So we use it to do x-rays and for radiation therapy to kill cancer cells. But back in the day, the very early 1900s, radium was seen. So even though radium is a very useful element in the medical industry, it is an extremely dangerous element. The radioactive properties can kill you. And unfortunately, back in the early 1900s, people were under the impression that radium was this magical health elixir, that it was just a cure-all, and that if you take radium in, say, as an additive in food or water, that you would be cured of, fatigue or any type of health problem, that you would be on top of your health game. And there were many products on the market that sold for so much money, very expensive, that had radium in them. I think one of them was called Radithor, and it was just water with drops of radium in it. And I think radium was found. It was marketed to be in toothpaste and cosmetics, and it was just this magical thing that helped you live longer and helped you be the healthiest you could possibly be, and people believed it. Another thing that radium was used for was to paint the numbers on a watch. So factories opened up. I think the first one opened up in 1917 in Newark, New Jersey, and this factory, it was a factory owned by the United States Radium Corporation. They hired women to paint numbers on a watch dial using radium. And these women, they were helping the war effort. They were helping with World War I, because these watches were going to soldiers who would be able to tell time in the dark. It was very important work that they were doing. Unfortunately, they had no idea about the health risks involved with working with radium. And these women, because these numbers were so tiny on the watch, they had to do it very precisely and accurately. And, they were also paid by the watch. They weren't paid by the hour. They weren't paid a salary. It was by the watch they produced. So the easiest and fastest way to paint these numbers would be to lick the brush tip. So what they would do is they would lick the brush tip, lick the brush. So they would lick the brush tip, put it in the luminous paint, and paint the watch dial. And they would repeat this over and over and over again. So the luminous paint contained radium, and it worked because it converted radiation into light through fluorescent chemicals. So these women were ingesting radium every time they did this, and they did this so many times throughout their day. That was their whole job for hours on end. And, radium was everywhere in these factories. It was in the air because they were working so closely with it. It was everywhere. It was in the air. It got on their hair. It got on their clothes. They would paint their nails with it. They would paint their teeth with it. These jobs were so coveted, and it was almost like these jobs were so popular, and women were idolized for these jobs. They were portrayed as artists in the newspaper, and it was almost like a status symbol to have, to be glow in the dark, so the women would wear their best dresses to the factories to work in, and then they would go out afterwards and they would shine in the dark. They would glow in the dark. Their hair would glow up, their face, their nails, everything. They would glow in the dark. And this was a status symbol. These women were so happy and had so much pride that they were helping their country and helping the war effort by painting these watches. They wanted to almost show off. They wanted to show the world that they were doing this wonderful thing. So as I said, the first company started in 1917 in Newark, New Jersey, and these women were assured by the managers that putting the radium paint into their mouth was perfectly safe, perfectly fine. From the very beginning, like I said, they were instructed to put the tip of the brush into their mouth, dip it into the paint, and paint the watch over and over and over again. So they were ingesting such a huge amount of radium. And like I said, this was such an important job, and it was so highly sought after. Women told their sisters and their friends, like, come work here. This is an awesome job. You got a lot of street cred. Like, you're just seen as really cool if you walk down the streets and you're glowing in the dark, And at the time, they were considered highly paid. Like, these jobs paid a lot of money, a lot more than women could make if they were working as like a secretary or working for the bank. They were highly paid. So the second factory opened up in Ottawa, Illinois, and then a third factory later opened in Connecticut. So what these girls didn't realize at the time, unfortunately, was that radium is extremely dangerous. And what was happening was radium acts a lot like calcium. So their bones were absorbing this radium. Radium poisoning actually takes a few years to start showing signs. So after a few years of working here, many women started experiencing a lot of symptoms. So they started feeling extreme fatigue. They were having really bad toothaches, so they would go to their dentist, and the dentist had no idea what was going on. They would just pull their teeth out because they thought maybe it was a rotted tooth. And it would never heal. It would never get better. It would just cause an infection. It would cause pus to ooze. It would cause more teeth to start aching, so they'd go back to the dentist to get their other teeth pulled out. Eventually, their jawbone was falling out of their face. They were in excruciating pain, and many of them died from this. Doctors were never able to figure out what was wrong. These women spent so much money putting themselves into debt, in medical bills, dentist bills, and many of them were so sick from the radium that they couldn't even work. So they had to stop working, so they had no money to pay for what was going on. So like I said, these women had toothaches. They'd go to the dentist, get their teeth pulled, wouldn't heal anything. It would just cause pus to ooze, infections to brew, bone to show. So basically what happened to a lot of these women is that they got osteonecrosis, which is literally decaying of the jawbone. So the jawbone would just decay in their mouth. It would fall out in parts. Their jawbone would just fall out. A doctor would go in and just touch the jawbone, and it would just fall into their hands. Like, it was really bad. And other symptoms, women would also suffer from anemia as well. I think there's something called like aplastic anemia, which women died from, and I'm not sure what anemia is. If I'm remembering correctly, it's something to do with like iron levels and hemoglobin. I think there's a lack of iron or a lack of hemoglobin, and it causes just extreme fatigue and hair loss, really pale, weight loss, you're really tired, you're really cold, you have no energy. So that was happening to a lot of the women as well. A lot of the women, because radium affects your bones, a lot of the women were in so much pain. Their legs were in pain, their back hurt, their arms hurt. A lot of the women shrunk, because their bones were literally decaying in their body, that they shrunk several inches. It was hard for them to move. It was hard for them to do anything normal activity. A lot of the women became bedridden. It was just one of the most awful ways to die. It was a very slow, painstaking death. You know, at that point, actually, scientists were becoming aware that radium is no good and can actually cause radium poisoning. But unfortunately, the women were not privy to this knowledge, and they, continued working at these factories, and the managers kept them in the dark. The managers did not let them know this information. They just kept claiming that everything was fine. There's actually a story of one of the women. She was, doing the normal dip brush method as usual. And one of the scientists who worked for the Radium Corporation company saw her doing that and said, "Hey, stop doing that. It's going to make you sick." And she, had to continue doing it because that's what she was instructed to do. But, as co-workers fell ill, these women, started worrying about the health effects of ingesting this luminous paint. Unfortunately, initially, radium actually kind of gives the appearance of health because it stimulates blood, like red blood cells. So the doctors that worked for the Radium Corporation companies would, do tests on these women, and they would say, "Hey, you're really healthy. Like, look at your blood. You have all these red blood cells." So the first woman to die from radium poisoning was named Molly Maggia. And, she started suffering from a toothache, went to the dentist, got her tooth pulled. That area started oozing pus. She suffered from, bad breath, a very bad smell coming from her mouth because her teeth were rotting, her jawbone was decaying, and unfortunately she passed away. And on her death certificate, it said she died from syphilis, which is an absolute lie. She did not have syphilis at all. She died from radium poisoning. And over time, more women started suffering from anemia, oozing pus from sore tooth extractions, jaw decay, sarcomas, which are cancers on the bone. So sarcomas are actually cancers on the bone, causes this huge swelling, and it's so painful and very deadly as well. These women had aches and pains, they had infections, and they died. Many of them died. And the doctors had no idea what was going on. They had no clue how to heal this pain, how to ease the pain of these women. And it was just awful. These women had so many medical procedures that they went through, racked up so much in medical debt, and nothing helped them. Nothing worked. They just died. There's a term called radium jaw, which is what many of the women suffered from, and it's literally holes in the jaw, in the jawbone. So eventually 5 women from the Newark, New Jersey radium plant got together and worked tirelessly to find a lawyer to sue this company. And after many years, they were finally successful, and they were compensated, and they had some medical bills paid for, but this money really wasn't for them. Their time was limited. They were sick. They were dying. It was really for their family, to set their family up and to help the other girls at the factory. And then eventually women at the Ottawa, Illinois plant, started getting really sick as well. They sued. They were successful in suing. Took much time and a lot of effort, but they were eventually successful. And the outcome was that lip pointing was actually deemed as something dangerous. So when these women sued, it helped the other women working at the factories, and lip pointing was then deemed as a dangerous technique, and women were given protective gear. And now death certificates were actually reporting correct cause of death, so not syphilis or whatever, the autopsy reports would falsify. It was the correct thing of radium poisoning for these women. And in the year 1938, the FDA actually banned all the deceptive marketing that went on the packaging of all of these radium all these radium products that claimed everlasting health. And eventually, in 1968, radium stopped being used to paint clock faces. Thousands of women were affected, because of working with radium. But these women did not die in vain. They made huge moves towards workers' rights and workers' protection. So these women also donated their bodies to science. So almost everything we know about radiation in the body is owed to them. Anyway, guys, that is the story of Radium Girls. I got all of this information pretty much from the book Radium Girls by Kate Moore. It's an amazing book. It really goes into detail about the stories of these amazing women and what happened, more so than this video. I highly recommend it. Depressing read, but it's an important read. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Bye.